I was only 19 years old when a single book altered the course of my life. I was then in the habit of asking people I admired a question. What is a book that changed your life? It's a simple question, but I wouldn't be watching this video if I hadn't asked it. What's a book that changed you, one that you'd recommend to your younger self? And so soon enough, I found Marcus Aurelius's Meditations in my hands. It was for me what the economist Tyler Cowen calls a quake book. It shook my entire worldview, and a single passage in it changed everything. In fact, the passage has changed the lives of many people in the 2,000 years since it was written. I've turned to it again and again when I dropped out of school, when I had problems at work, problems in my relationships, problems with employees, and just normal, everyday life stuff. The passage goes like this: our actions may be impeded, but there can be no impeding our intentions or dispositions because we can accommodate and adapt. The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. And then Marcus Aurelius concludes with some of the most powerful words ever written. The impediment to action advances action, he says. What stands in the way becomes the way. Marcus Aurelius wrote that to himself, likely on the battlefront as he led the Roman army against barbarian tribes, or possibly in the palace under almost unimaginable pressure. What Marcus was reminding himself is the core tenet of Stoicism. It doesn't really matter what happens, because in every situation, good or bad, we have incredible power, the power to choose how we respond. Stoicism as a philosophy is ultimately about action, an art that is designed to be practiced. And how does what stands in the way become the way? The story of John D. Rockefeller is illustrative. Before John D. Rockefeller became the richest person in modern history, he was just a kid making 50 cents a day as a bookkeeper and aspiring investor. 2 years into his first job, the Panic of 1857 struck, and it hit just as Rockefeller was starting to make some headway in his career. The top investors who supposedly knew what they were doing lost everything. His peers either complained about this violent economic disaster or left the business altogether. People were ruined, people were disillusioned. But Rockefeller didn't care. He didn't care that it was the greatest market depression in history. He didn't care about what everyone else was doing. He didn't care that people with more experience were telling him to find a new career. All he cared about was what was in his control. He could carefully observe the events that were unfolding. He could look for any opportunity to learn from this panic. He could consider it a baptism in the market. 20 years later, Rockefeller alone controlled 90% of the oil market, and he would say with gratitude how much he had benefited from the difficulties and the apprenticeship he had in those difficulties, in those years when he decided to study and learn rather than turn tail and run. So how can we cultivate this fortitude? How can we be like Rockefeller, the economy in historic decline, not bemoaning our fate, but embracing the historic opportunity? The answer, the Stoics would say, as Marcus has written, is to stop caring about everything outside your control. It's not easy, but it's simple. It's a two-part mental shift. First, you have to see every situation rationally. You must not panic or make rash decisions. You must not take it personally. You must not exaggerate. You must not focus on what it means, what everyone else says it means. And then, like Rockefeller, you have to ask yourself, what do I have control over here? What can I change or influence? Where is the opportunity to learn? Take a business decision that turned out to be a mistake. You could choose whether it was a complete failure or a hypothesis that turned out to be wrong. You could choose to be crushed by it. You could look at how enormous the cost of the failure has been, or like a good scientist, you could decide to learn from it, to use it for your next experiment. You could see it as data. You could see it like a writer and use it as material. What about that computer glitch that erased all your work? You choose whether it ruins your day, your week, your year, or whether it makes you twice as good, since you will now have to do it again this time more prepared. Perhaps you were injured recently and are stuck in bed recovering. You choose whether that's an excuse for killing time or an excuse to start the blog or the screenplay or the project you've been putting off. Maybe you've recently lost your job. You choose whether you spiral into sadness or into teaching yourself the skills to get the job you've always wanted. Someone insulted you. You choose whether you are going to be offended, whether you're going to respond, or whether you're going to let it go. Some call it a thick skin or grit or resilience or perseverance or resolve. Marcus Aurelius called it tranquility. It's what comes when you stop caring, he said, about what others say or think or do. When you stop caring about what you can't control, what you can't change. When you stop caring, Marcus Aurelius said, about everything but what you do. This is the chief task in life, Marcus's favorite philosopher Epictetus says. It's to identify in separate matters so you can say clearly to yourself what are externals not in your control and where do you have choices you actually do control. Where then do I look for good and evil, Epictetus said, not in uncontrollable externals, but within myself to the choices that are my own. Or, as the Stoics say, it's about what's up to us and what's not up to us. Once we have organized our understanding of the world into this black and white bucket, what remains, what was so central to Epictetus' survival as a slave, is to focus on what is up to us, our attitudes, our emotions, our wants, our desires, our opinion about what happened to us, what we will learn from this, what we will do in response to this, how we will be made better because of this. Everything else, who cares?